So, new beginnings. Well, new beginnings mean change. Whatever the new beginning is, whether it's a new job or a new house or a new member of the family or a significant change in circumstances or a restart after all has stopped. New beginnings mean change. Even where the new beginning has been anticipated and even looked forward to, the change can be traumatic and not quite what we expected it to be. To choose a new beginning means embracing the insecurity of that new beginning and learning to make good choices even when we feel like turning and running away and going back to the old end. In our exploration of the big story of God, today we come to the great Exodus from Egypt. Last week in our family service, we took a fast tour through Moses' story of setting out the path of the escape from Egypt. This is all the Israelites have wanted. This is all they had hoped for and planned for, a day when they escaped slavery and were able to continue on their journey as a nation to the promised land. We managed to escape with the rulers, the pharaohs' reluctant permission, after a series of plagues that made Pharaoh kind of say, "Oh, go on then, just go. I can't do this anymore." The new beginning that the Israelites had always wanted has come, and they give their thanks to God and they follow in his way. At the end of chapter 13 of Exodus sees, after a breather and the setting out of some rules for the journey, the Israelites setting out on the journey of the rest of their life. God guided their way, not on the shortest route through what was to become Philistine country, but a longer and roundabout route. This way, they wouldn't encounter the security measures the Egyptians had put in place and were more likely to survive the journey. They would also not have a reason to go back. This new beginning was to be an actual new beginning, a fresh start that took them far away from slavery and into the promised land. This new beginning was to start with a difficult journey through the desert, through a season of not knowing where they were going, but a season that would form them and make them into the people they were to become. And the map shows the journey they were on. The green circle shows where they'd got to by the time we get to chapter 14, Pi Hahiroth, at the open mouth of the canal into the Red Sea. A kind of cul-de-sac, really, a dead end. They could have gone other ways around the Red Sea, but instead they find themselves at the sea. It was here, at this dead end, that God told them to set up camp. A seemingly dead end in the new beginning. Meanwhile, the Egyptian pharaoh had suddenly realised what he was doing and regretting letting them go. He'd lost all his workers. How would the building work be finished? They set off to find the Israelites, and the Israelites find themselves cornered. God saw this coming, and in seeing this coming, he sees the situation to show his might. He uses the situation to show his might and glory to the Israelites. At the end of the cul-de-sac, where all seems lost, all they can do is depend on him. Simple, yes? Well, not so simple, really. As we know, when crisis hits, however much we know we can depend on God, our reaction isn't always one that says we believe this to be true, that we can depend on God. And the Israelites' reaction is understandable. They have a go at Moses and say, well, it would have been better staying in Egypt. It was better there. Slavery would be better than this. Their initial exit from Egypt was fueled on adrenaline. It's only when they stop and they realise that they are here, that they are somewhere they don't want to be, that they continue to feel unsafe. They don't realise that the new beginning wasn't going to come immediately. Then their trust in God is waning, because God's path doesn't seem to be making any sense. Why would he bring them to this cul-de-sac, to this dead end? where the way ahead seems impossible and the threat from behind is getting closer. They have a massive meltdown. A Paddy, a Strop, a Mardy, I would call it, from Nottingham. Whatever word you would use for this kind of behaviour. They cry out to God, but their words to Moses indicate how terrified they are. The escape is pointless if they're going to end up dead anyway. And the story kind of seems to blame God. God hardens Pharaoh's heart. And that's probably one of the hardest parts of this passage. Is this God teaching a lesson? What happens next? Is this what God wanted to happen? Did he want the Egyptians to die in the Red Sea? Is Pharaoh's heart so hardened there is no chance of a turnaround? What about grace? I mean, grace says that anyone has a chance. Well, this story isn't about grace. This is about our reaction to free will and God giving us choices. If you look back at Pharaoh's heart throughout the whole of the Exodus story, you will see that his attitude to the possibility of the Israelites being set free changes regularly, but it involves his heart. And the way heart is used in this story is all about the will. He basically kept on changing his mind and turning against the Israelites. His heart was not functioning properly. It had become heavy and he'd lost any element of care for the Israelites, or he'd chosen to lose it. The hardening of his heart might mean that he became unswerving. He became more resolute in his thinking as the story'd gone on. He'd had enough, but actually he didn't want to let go. And he realises this and his heart becomes so hardened, it looks like it's not going to change. He became more against the Israelites each time his heart was hardened. And Pharaoh makes up his own mind that he's not going to let the Israelites go after all. And he hardens his heart against them. Then God says, towards the end of the story, well, your heart is hardened, let it be hardened, and I'll hand you over to your own will. Your mind is made up, now see what the consequences will be. God kind of says to Pharaoh, well, have it your own way. You can plead and plead and plead with someone to change their mind, but sometimes you just have to let them deal with the consequences. When God hardens Pharaoh's heart, that is what he is doing. He's letting Pharaoh deal with the consequences of his own choices. And the consequences are chaos and being swallowed up by the Red Sea. Sometimes we make bad choices, and our bad choices lead to bad things. When we bring punishment upon ourselves, there is always a chance of a turnaround. Pharaoh could have chosen to unharden his heart or ask God to help him, but he didn't, and his heart stayed hardened, and he had to deal with the consequences. So, back to the big story. The Israelites are backed into a tight corner at the end of a cul-de-sac with nowhere to go. What can they do? They can do nothing but trust in God. And that's what Moses says. Moses says in verse 13 and 14, do not be afraid. Stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Lord will fight for you. You need only be still. When we are backed into a corner, when we have to face the consequences of a new beginning, when freedom is not all it's cracked up to be, and we face difficult choices within the new beginning, going back should never be an option. Clearly, here is not an option. Trusting God in moving forward is the option. God promises the Israelites that they should be okay, that they would be okay. And so they needed to pause for a moment, get their breath back, remember his promise, and turn to him. In one of my most difficult I've had enough God moments in the last 18 months, I read this passage. Emerging from COVID has been like the promised new beginning of the Israelites. We've seen hope ahead. We've seen freedom ahead. We've seen a new beginning, but despite the initial adrenaline and excitement, freedom has not been all we might hope it is cracked up to be. Trying to work out the way ahead has been like, at times, wandering around the end of a cul-de-sac, trying to find a route, any route out. But God says, You only need to be still. Look where I've brought you. Look how far you've come. Then know that there is better ahead. Things ahead are never going to be the same as they always were. And part of our decision making is about choosing to embrace the new beginning offered, or not embracing it at all. And it's in these cul-de-sac moments that we realise, like the Israelites, that we can only depend on God. So how do we deal with that cul-de-sac when we hit it in our lives? When there is the seemingly impassable sea on one side and only the past if we go backwards? How about if we turn around and go back? Reject the new beginning we have been given and go with the Israelites. And go with what the Israelites want to do and go back to Egypt because we think it's better. Well, that's not going to work. The old problems, they have not gone away. In fact, for the Israelites, they probably had got bigger. The Egyptian armies had come to bring them back. Pharaoh's heart was harder than ever, more against them than it had ever been, and the situation would be dire. Going back would not be helpful. Better the devil you know is rarely the right answer. When we leave a difficult situation, convinced it's the right choice, called out by God, then to go back is never the right answer. Okay, so here's another one. How about we divert, go round the Red Sea and go up to the route that is easiest? Face directly to the destination and walk as fast as we can to where we think we should be going. That's not going to work either. For the Egyptians, the fastest route was dangerous. For the Israelites, the fastest route was dangerous. And it wasn't the way in which God was calling them, because the Egyptians were there. The straight route out of Egypt was not the way to go, because they would have been caught and sent back to Egypt. It's a bit like when we think we can fix stuff ourselves without God. We can't do that. Even though we think we know the easy route out, we don't know what it will contain. God knows what it does. Even if his route doesn't make sense, God's way is always best. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Okay, so here's a third option. How about if we sit still and we do nothing? What if the Israelites just stay in the camp? What if this call to be still is just to wait until something else happens? Now, they are out of Egypt. Surely it's okay to relax. Maybe others will make their new beginning happen and they will join them later. Well, no, that's not the answer too. Staying still forever is not the answer, because the old will overwhelm. The call to be still is not a call to be still and stay still, but a call to be still and look at God. We look at God in the hope and the knowledge that he knows the way ahead. Staying still for too long makes us stagnant. We're all called to be part of seeking the way ahead. For the Israelites, the danger was still right behind them. Staying still would have been disastrous. Our past is still our past, even if we have walked away from it, and we need to put things in place to stop the stories of our past from overwhelming and taking us back there. Acknowledging that the past is what makes us who we are, that story is still important, but not letting the difficult things from the past define who we are. We need to recognise the damaging things from the past, deal with them, whatever we need to do to deal with them, and then move on. If we sit still and keep doing the same old, if we let those things from the past influence how we behave now, we will find we have no new stories to tell. And the past, it will overwhelm. Forgetting the past isn't forgetting it existed. Forgetting the past is remembering it's still a threat. It's still part of our story. And working out ways to move ahead despite the past. How about we trust in God's way? Surely that's the answer. And it is. We all know the answer, don't we? But what the story of the Israelites tells us, the story of arriving at the Red Sea, is that new beginnings aren't always easy. And that makes trusting in God throughout this whole thing hard and feeling that it is hard is okay. God doesn't tell them off for having a meltdown, but he tells them to just be still, not to let the doubts and the fears overwhelm them. When the familiar things end and we're called to new beginnings, things have to end to make a space for the new. We have a choice to make. Do we rely on our own understanding, or do we rely on God's? Do we choose our own path like Pharaoh, or do we trust that God will get us through the turbulent waters somehow? We only need to be still and know that God does know what he's doing. He knows the bigger picture. He knows the way ahead. He will part the waters when it is time. How do we face the future? We choose to leave the past behind, recognising it's part of our story, but not living as if it's our story now. We choose to step forward in God's timing and not our own. And we trust in him, knowing that the cul-de-sac is not the final destination. Look at what happens to the Israelites. They escape. Whether we believe that's a natural phenomenon of the water parting or a supernatural event, God knew what he was doing. God was in that. And he knows what he's doing in our lives too. Do not be afraid. Stand firm. The Lord will fight for you. You only need to be still.